Good morning, everyone. This is the beginning of ATC1, the Advanced Training Course 1. So that means session 1. So we really get started now with the training program. And I'm very excited. And it was very important to me that I would actually be involved in the very first ATC and the very first session. When you listen to me now for the next half hour or so before Roberto is taking over, we share this session. Those of you who are familiar with public procurement will probably think, what kind of a baby course is he running here? And that is exactly what you should think when you're already familiar with public procurement, because you are a very diverse crowd. You come from different backgrounds. There are lawyers, there are economists, there are other disciplines here as well. We have a lot of especially economics and law to teach you. And that means we have to start from somewhere. And when some of you think, well, what you are saying is really a bit basic, then this is how it should be, because we only started the training program like 180 seconds ago. So let me just guide you slowly from the basis. And then as the day goes on, I promise you it's going to get more and more complicated and complex. Okay? So first, baby slide. Here's the first one, it's already there. Okay. So what is actually public procurement? Yeah, really a baby slide. What we have here is basically always, not always, but again, I have to start with the basics, the classic constellation, two actors. On the one hand, we have the public, the government of whatever level, nationality, denomination. We've got the government. And the government, for the simple reason that in the modern economy, the government cannot produce or provide every service itself. It needs to buy from the private sector. So the other actor is the private sector. Construction companies, industrial production, service providers in the IT sector, you name it. Yeah, it ranges from actually cleaning this university every day to buying a nuclear submarine for the Navy. Okay, so buying, the public buying from the private sector. Now, of course, that's not the end of it. In this basic constellation, there are already quite a few atypical cases. For example, what happens when somehow the body you're buying from is kind of part of your own governmental structure? That's already one. What if you say, I'm not going to buy myself, but I'm going to use a centralized, specialized procurement agency? So almost like a ministry for procurement. Yeah. So all of these are special cases. We lawyers, we can write. We can fill shelves of books with that. But the basic constellation from which everything else derives is a public sector buyer, a contracting authority, buying from the private sector. And a European speciality is here already, that we also have a regime for so-called utilities. That would be a provider of energy, perhaps telecommunications, transport services, water, yeah, which an American would find bizarre that we would actually include this in our notion of public and utilities procurement. But the European background here is, of course, that many of these providers used to be state-owned, had therefore a privileged monopoly position, and are therefore now treated not the same as contracting authorities. There's a much milder, less intrusive regime, more flexible regime for utilities, but that in Europe at least, we actually have a connection here between the public buyers and utilities, although they're now organized as private companies. Okay. Now, therefore, I summarize that public procurement refers to the goods, construction, and services the government or utility needs to buy to operate. Yeah? So the background here is that the government cannot operate, cannot function without buying, without procuring these things. And public procurement law regulates this process. Before centuries ago, before there was a notion of what public procurement actually is, this wasn't regulated. So somebody in charge of buying for the government would just go ahead and buy like you or me are buying things on the street, or getting somebody in to repair a boiler or something like that, And that process proved to be highly inefficient, corrupt. Let me point this out from the very beginning. We are dealing here with a potentially very sleazy, very dirty government activity. In countries like the country where I'm based, the United Kingdom, you cannot really bribe a judge. Give me an easy sentence, judge. Here are a few notes. Can't do that. You can't bribe a policeman not to fine you because you parked wrongly. You can't do that in the UK. Can you bribe a contracting officer to give you a contract? Probably can. And if you can do that in the UK, you can do that in most countries, perhaps with the exception of Denmark. Okay. So that whole process, and it was really, to a large extent, the fact that this process was too corrupt, too inefficient, too unprofessional, that starting, it's to a large extent, in its modern form, a French invention from post-revolutionary times in France, but there are actually also examples for this even in the Roman Empire. So you have basically the idea that this process needs to be regulated. Now let me move on to this is a very important slide to me, because this already is important for your research projects potentially, because it gives us an idea of what we are actually talking about. And I would differentiate here between three basic phases of the procurement process. And we are not interested in all of these phases equally. Okay? So you start with what I would call the budget phase. So somebody in the government, in any ministry, or in your local authority, or indeed in parliament, needs to decide what to buy. What is it actually that we want to buy? And then, of course, to see that this is in line with the money that you have. Needs to be somewhere related to your budget. So this particular decision on what to buy precisely is not regulated really by international treaties or by the EU. Perhaps it is not particularly regulated at all. If it is regulated, it's regulated by your national budget law, very often in obscure parts of the Constitution, or not even in the Constitution, a very strange law I have no familiarity with whatsoever. Good news. So we're not really going to deal with that phase very much, except for perhaps a couple of cases. So this phase now ends with that decision. This is what we want to buy. We want this tank, battle tank for our armed forces. We want a hospital in this particular city. We want a primary school here. We want to connect this island with a bridge with the mainland. This is what we're going to buy. And we kind of vaguely checked whether we have the money. Okay? So what starts now as a second phase, and that's the one that we're really interested in, we now start with the procurement phase, the proper procurement phase. And the question here is not what to buy, but who to buy it from. So the whole question here is, who is going to be our partner? Who's going to provide us with this service, with this construction, with this product? This, and here you can already start legal arguments. So just take my opinion here. Yeah, you start with the publication of a contract notice. Yeah, at least when the process is regulated. So whether you want competition or not, whether you want to discriminate or not, whether you want to provide a market access or not, you need in most systems to have some level of transparency. By the way, all these words, competition, transparency, market access, discrimination, it's going to come back again and again and again until you cry for mercy. But here, basically, we have a first level of transparency through the publication of a contract notice. This is what we want to buy, and then a few other pieces of information. Yeah? It then goes, and Marta and I will talk about these procedures following this session. It then goes through a procedure, a very open one, a more restricted one, something with negotiation, something completely digital, yeah, to completely, or involving opening of envelopes while the TV is there. I mean, there's so many different ways. And then the process ends. People think it ends with the decision who's going to get the contract, with the award of the contract, but actually not really. The process is really only over with the conclusion being here an EU law term, not necessarily used everywhere. The English contract law term would be the making, very simple word, the making of the contract. Yeah. So from now on, you're the partner, and now we sit down and we sign a contract. Yeah, just to give you something more illustrative. What then starts is a third phase. And that third phase is increasingly difficult to separate from the second. It's a completely different phase and also governed by different principles. What we now have is a contract. So what we're dealing with now is contract law. Yeah? Very much the contracts that you might have with your plumber or with anybody else or your employer. Yeah? So we have a contract. And that contract, whereas the procurement phase proper is very regulated how long it can take, like 32 days, 40 days, 52 days, various limitations. It needs to be time limited. The contract management phase, for example, of, let's say, a nuclear submarine, yeah, can be decades. And many things can go wrong. And this is then the contract management phase, and it is governed by contract law. And what type of law that is completely up to your own legal system. In England and in Germany, where I am originally from, that contract is a private law contract, just like a contract that you and I could have about the purchase of, I don't know, your computer. Yeah? In France, there's a different opinion about that. This is a public contract because one of the partners is the government, and therefore we have a different regime, a public law regime. Yeah? But please keep these three phases apart. Whether these phases are kept apart, especially the second and the third, is very much dependent on your legal systems. So specifically, for example, in the United States, where this whole area of law is called government contract law, it's not really kept separate. So the people who are specializing in this are very much experts on both, on the second and the third phase. Whereas I'm from Europe, for me this ends with the conclusion of the contract, and I know only what I learned as an undergraduate student about, which is of course a lot, but it's not really something I would dare writing about. Okay, so three phases to keep apart. Something to always keep in mind is the enormous importance economically of procurement activity. Now it varies, of course, from one country to another, but it is always a big share. So in the EU, we think it's about 14% of GDP in the EU member states. In the UK, it's slightly higher at 20%. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we've got a national health service that is basically run completely like a part of the state. So it's a bit bigger there. And in the EU, we think we've got about 250,000 contracting authorities, central government authorities, but then also regions or states, provinces, districts, local authorities, And in the EU, and we were speaking a lot about the EU here because many of us are coming from that background. It is about 2.1 trillion every year. In the EU, we're speaking about the largest public procurement market in the world. Why do we now need to regulate this process? Why do we need law for that? Can't we leave that to the economists? And of course, you would expect that from me. I'm a law professor, so of course you can't leave that just to the economists. It needs to be densely regulated. And there are a couple of reasons that are fairly uncontroversial, and there are a couple of points that are more controversial. I think most people will agree that one of the things that procurement law has to ensure is the efficiency of the process. I would say this is almost, and I'm going to use these terms, is the only primary objective, meaning the most important objective. You need a hospital by the 1st of May. The only thing that is really absolutely important is that there is a hospital at the 1st of May. You need a bridge on the 1st of June. The only thing is really important that there's a fully functional bridge there on the 1st of June. Doesn't matter that people were discriminated. Doesn't matter that there were bribes. Doesn't matter that this was a completely intransparent kind of process. First of all, or that the government actually got this as a very good price, might be completely. The main thing is you need a bridge, and there is a bridge. Efficiency. Effectiveness, efficiency, these two words are kind of used interchangeably. You already become then, next point, you already go beyond that, although you're still talking about primary objectives, when you talk about value for money. That's a very English term. And basically what this means, there shouldn't just be a bridge, but ideally the government should get this bridge at the best possible terms. As cheaply as possible, the best possible bridge, as quickly as possible, and then you start basically putting on economic criteria. It's not really, we're not yet at the sustainability level, but you basically get this under the best possible terms, value for money. Next point is, and here we're already getting into competition. So you want this process ideally being something that is the result of competition. Here you're already becoming a bit ideological, because you think if those who are bidding for the contract, so at least more than one, if they know that there's somebody else in the equation, then that puts pressure on them to be better, and that is creating competition. But then competition is actually not actually an objective in itself. It's already being something which I would call a vehicle to get where you actually want to get. So competition is getting you value for money. Okay. The next point here, we're getting ideologically EU law, non-discrimination and equal treatment. These are not the same things. In the EU, non-discrimination is non-discrimination on grounds of nationality, meaning that, for example, a contracting authority from Italy is not treating a bidder from outside Italy, but from the EU, from France or Germany or Austria, less favorably in one way or another than an Italian bidder. So, because there is a natural tendency for the Italian contracting authority or the Austrian or the Danish, doesn't matter, to award their contracts to their own domestic suppliers and own domestic industry. Everybody wants to do that. And EU law is already trying to match this. Yeah, it works against it because EU law in its very source, internal market law, it's all about against discrimination on grounds of nationality. Now, equal treatment is slightly different. This is connected to competition. Here we just want to make sure that irrespective of whether the bidder is, let's say, let me stay in the Italian example, is Italian or not, that even between 2 or 3 Italian bidders, they're always treated equally. And not one of them has more information than the others. And one of them can submit later or has some other kind. Equal treatment. Always treat all the bidders exactly the same. Connected to the non-discrimination idea is market access. So procurement law, at least when it comes to international trade law, the procurement chapters of international trade law or EU internal market law is always there also to ensure that bidders from other member states have access to the procurement market in each member state. Yeah? Transparency is the next one. But transparency is also seen as an objective in itself, but actually it's also a vehicle. In order to get competition, you need to make sure that people know that you have this contract to offer. And in order to make people know, you need some transparency. So transparency transports competition, and competition then leads to value for money. Okay? Of course, it's also an extremely good instrument against corruption. Corruption likes to work in the shade. Transparency is definitely not what you want. Yeah? And has got a number of other positive effects. Prevention of corruption can be an objective. It is not officially in the EU, but it is always on the mind of most legislators at the national level. And then we're moving to sustainability after all this. Now, sustainability, here we're getting to the network topics, yeah. I would say it's fair enough to say when it comes to sustainability, the environmental objectives are probably the mother of the whole thing. That's where it all came from. That's how it all started. Yeah? So what are we talking about here? We don't just want value for money, a good price, high quality, early delivery, effectiveness, efficiency. We want more. We want to use the procurement function of the state, this enormous amount of money, to make the world a different place, a better place. Yeah? So we have environmental objectives, and that means we would like to make sure that through the pull of procurement, environmental objectives are accommodated in the contracts that we enter into as a government, and that overall, therefore, environmental levels are raised. That's a classic. The little sister of that, if I can call it, or the little brother, yeah, is climate change. Although actually using procurement to further climate change is pretty new. Yeah, here we're not talking about something that has been around for decades. Here we're really talking about something new. And guess who's going to work on this? This network, yeah? Okay. Labor standards, well, almost came right after the environmental standards, but they're not as well established as you might think. So here the point, although a couple of these ideas are very old in procurement law, the whole idea of people who are working, for example, on construction contracts for the government should be paid properly, should be safe at the workplace, should have holidays, you know, all these labor law ideas. And here we are talking about something which is already much less accommodated in many procurement instruments. In the EU, it's currently definitely on the rise. Absolutely new is the idea of gender smart procurement, meaning we also have an agenda as a government to ensure the equality of the sexes, so equal treatment of men and women. And that means we even try to pull this in our procurement laws. Yeah. Small and medium-sized enterprises is another one. Yeah. So we want to make sure, because of the importance of small and medium-sized enterprises, as employing most people, as being more loyal to their regions, as providing more training than big companies do. We want to make sure that they have a fair share of the procurement markets, and we need to do something about it. Perhaps some of the contracts are just too big for an SME to handle. Yeah? So all these sustainability objectives enter the equation. Now, watch me, I'm going to do something provocative. I'm going to kind of challenge a bit the dogma of this network. So I'm going to say something which we didn't really say in our consortium agreement or in our application. And that is very important to me as a slide. Very important to me because, of course, the basic idea, I think that's how many of us think here. Probably it's also how I think ultimately, let me just take the edge off here, is that accommodating sustainability, fight against climate change, equal treatment of men and women, environmental objectives, labor objective through public procurement is a good thing. That's what we all want. That's what should be done. Yeah? Absolutely do that in your thesis if you want to. Absolutely do that, especially if you're convinced of that. But please also keep in mind that there are different opinions on this. Because in order to make sustainability a part of the procurement process, you need to change the procurement process. You need to change the procurement law so that this function of allowing sustainability to be transported by your procurement activity can actually work. So, for example, and that's what I have no problems with, when you define your product in the specifications, you can write all this in, yeah, like environmental standards, emissions, the products that are used, the processes that are used. You can write this in, but you need to change. And with that, you might end up at a station where you actually start compromising. You know that word, meaning having a negative effect on your prime objective. Meaning, in order to promote green procurement, social procurement, SME-friendly procurement, gender-smart procurement, to fight climate change through procurement, you might end up paying a price. For example, by the contract being a lot more expensive. The state has to pay more, the taxpayer has to pay more for this. By possibly losing some of the competitors who no longer want to bid for this contract. Possibly also, what do you think is going to happen to your procurement law? Yeah? In the EU, in the last big reform process of 2014, they said we're going to have a much more streamlined and simplified procurement system. So a much smaller law, yeah, shorter law, simple law that everybody can easily handle. And we're also going to do a lot of sustainability. Yes, there's a lot of sustainability in there now, but simpler is it not? Yeah, it is the thing we now have simplification is a complete lie. Because what happens if you want to accommodate, for example, environmental standards through procurement? The law gets bigger because the standards themselves have to be written into the law. Yeah? It can even challenge your prime objective of effectiveness because, of course, the whole process gets complicated. If the process gets complicated, people start making mistakes. There might be delays. There might be a situation where the whole project doesn't come off the ground. There might be, here comes the lawyer again, and we're not going to cover that in this course here first, but there might be litigation. Yeah, if you're a contracting officer for a while, then litigation risk, meaning ending up in court, being challenged, and then everything falls apart. Yeah. So all these issues have to be taken into account. Plus, the question of whether procurement. Sorry, don't get me wrong. You know, I'm not here from the right wing of the Conservative Party who says, I want a pure procurement that is out for value for money. I'm not against gender equality. I'm not against the green and the environment. I want the fight against climate change. I want all these things. Question is procurement really the best instrument for this? And should we not always consider that there is a price to pay for this? And the instrument also is whether you're not asking the contracting officer a bit too much. Poor contracting officers. Yeah. You think you're just building a new primary school, or you're not. You're making environmental policy and labor policy, and you're fighting the climate change. Yeah? And with all those litigation risks that come with it. And then, by the way, people can write wonderful things, for example, on how safe the workmen will be on the construction side into their tender documents and win the contract for it. Who's actually going to check whether that really happens? Yeah. So is the contracting officer now in a power to actually send people to the construction site to see whether they're all wearing these hard hats? Yeah. Or is that really the right person to do it? Or should there be other parts of the government? And let's not forget that for all these objectives, there are other instruments: taxation, criminal law, state aids. Yeah, keep all those in mind. Okay, that was just quite important. Shall I just do a quick, because it's time, quick overview? You're doing EU, aren't you? Yeah, just very quickly. I'm not doing the EU. We're working a lot here with many legal systems. Yeah, every country has their own procurement law. But we're working with 3 instruments which are quite different. The most important one is probably going to be the EU system, and we will learn, because that's the most advanced one. Yeah. But for example, we also have one in international trade. The World Trade Organization has a government procurement agreement. And this already tries to ensure basic WTO principles, especially that of non-discrimination and national treatment, and of transparency. And it is a bit complicated because it's a plurilateral agreement. Not all WTO members are part of this agreement. And especially when it comes to coverage, which is an issue I will address after the lunch break, it's highly complicated because you need to enter this system and then start negotiating how deep the coverage of your system actually goes. Is it only your central government? Does it go down to the provinces? Are local authorities included? And what about utilities, etc.? Yeah, so that is quite a complicated system there. And then there is no movement here. Am I already done?
Probably you're done.
Ah, my dear. Okay. Another one, just very quickly, I can do that without a slide. Normally I would get very nervous now, but I've been doing this job for 20 years, so I can just about handle it. I'm a big boy. We're also dealing with the UNCITRAL Model Law. I'm just saying very quickly, this is really what it says on the tin, a model law. I'm just saying that because many years I taught this, and then people say this violates, this is illegal because it violates the UNCITRAL Model Law. No, this is not how this works. United Nations and the United Nations body has developed a model law that can then be used by everybody, anywhere, as a model to introduce their own national system. So the model law is not binding law. The model law is just a model. What becomes model binding is then the law that you develop from the UNCITRAL Model Law. I love the UNCITRAL Model Law from 1994, the old one, especially for courses in procurement, because it's very short and very simple. And you can basically just say a group like this, who's never done procurement, perhaps. I'm not saying you are. I know how diverse you are. Just look into this, and you can look and you can immediately see what this particular provision tries to do. The new one from 2011 is very complex and has a guide to enactment, which actually is no longer printed, but it's actually just on a website. Really huge, so it can no longer fulfill that function, but of course it's more useful for those countries that are actually introducing their national laws. For teaching, the old one is a lot better. Okay, with that I hand over to Roberto.
Thanks a lot, really, Martin, for this. Oh, I use this one for this introduction. Now my turn to have the slides, which just one moment. Just one moment. No, it's just needed to this thing to go out so that I can access my slides. Yes. Okay. Now I do. Oh, grazie. Now. This was really an enjoyable start of the morning, and I really wanted to go to the basic and stress the interdisciplinary character of this network. What I will be trying to do is to stress that the non-lawyers, they need the lawyers, but the lawyers do need the non-lawyers, economists, business scientists, and so on and so forth. So starting from the law. I have just a very short story about that. Once at a conference, I listened to a brilliant procurement economist, Professor Spagnolo. And he explained in half an hour that the best solution in framework agreements with more than one tenderers is to have two of them. And that, from economic point of view, made a lot of sense. The only problem was that at that time the EU law said at least three. So two made economic sense, but it was unlawful. So the non-lawyers must always work with the lawyers to check whether what they design, it is actually according to the law. And this only the lawyer can tell. Of course, in the best possible world, the law will go along economic common sense, provided that there is one sure economic common sense. But this is not so because, as Martin was showing you, we have kind of 9 possible objectives in public procurement legislation. So a compromise needs to be found. And this is found not by the economists, not even by the lawyers, it's found by the lawmakers. And they can make a total mess of everything. So you need, we all need the lawyers. This first part, then I will tell you what the lawyers need, but a little bit differently. And building back fast on what Martin was already saying. Well, in Europe, there have been very different approaches to what we call public procurement. The Dutch, there is nothing as public procurement. That is private law. It's commercial procurement. The English, they were pragmatic tools, maybe guidelines, maybe someone in a minister. You just think of the Ministry of Magic, Harry Potter, some very great person drafting arcane rules in small cubicles without any contact with, I'm not saying reality, not even light, it's just writing. And then there was the German approach. This is the fiscus, the money of the state. So there must be some rules, but they are budgetary rules. The first phase is not something that you put in the law books and teach at the law school. And then there is the French administrative law approach, actually also the Italian approach, also the pre-Italian unification approach. This is the money of the state, and basically we don't trust our public servants. So we don't just pile rule upon rule upon rule, simplification, seen from here. Yes, it's something that you tell people to put them to bed. We will simplify the law. No worry, sleep tight. I've never seen anything like that in all my career that is now spanning, including law school for more than 30 years. And the idea is that you have rules and what, sorry, Martin was saying, rules that can be litigated about, because you want competitors enforcing those rules if they are breached. So it's for totally different approach. And this is not the word. This is the way Europe was until 1970. And then we had EU law. And the sources of law is a lot of important stuff, starting from the TFU and the general principles. Well, the idea is that we need to have an internal market in the EU because we have 4 freedoms, including the free movement of goods and services. And there is, Martin has already said, this is a general principle, a rule actually of non-discrimination, and then you have general principles such as transparency. But that was never enough. How was, you know, the world was not made in one day. It took, according to some accounts, the Almighty God to 7 days to make, well, 6, and then he rested to make, he or she, I don't know, but anyway, whatever rested, 6 days it took, well, to build the internal market. First, it was not originally called the internal market, it was called the common market. But the idea was that, yes, it's not enough to say you are free, but you need to have rules to make sure that the freedoms are respected. And these rules come in form of directives. What is a directive? A directive is not immediately applicable. You need implementation at the member state. So EU law on public procurement, we have directives at EU level and then implementation at the presently 27 member states. And as Martin was saying, these directives have been focusing on the world stage. If this was not recorded, I would launch a question to the audience. Why? Directives, GPA, they are all focusing on the world stage. But I can't launch the question, so the question is there, but I give you immediately the answer. It's a bit more boring. The answer is because discrimination doesn't take place so much at the budget stage. I want a bridge. Am I discriminating? Of course not. I just want a bridge. Then the discrimination becomes possible when I'm selecting who is building the bridge. Discrimination is about who, not so much about what. So they were focusing on the world stage, and now a little bit on the performance. As Martin was saying, the two are getting a bit blurred. And we had a number of reform cycles, the most recent 2014, about classic procurement concessions and utilities. And every time, forget about simplification. And it's not just about sustainability making our life complicated. You know, there is also this thing about innovation. And you think buying innovation through classic award procedures, Italian style. There is no way you are going to buy innovation. Most probably you are buying 2 generations ago stuff because they are still using the same kind of document. But then you need a new procedure. You need an article which is 1 page long, and so on and so forth. So for us, this is in the EU, our legal background, EU treaties, directives, member states, legislation. And the interesting thing about the 2014 reform was that there was a lot of interinstitutional dynamics. The European Parliament finally got involved. Public procurement was not something arcane for a few, let's say, member states to discuss among themselves. Politicians got involved. Also very important, courts. This is a big difference between GPA and EU law. GPA, yes, there is no discrimination in the GPA. There are procedures in the GPA. By the way, they are aligned, EU are aligned or are supposed to be aligned with the GPA. But litigation, I tell the rest of the class, the non-lawyers, for us, the law is a starting point. I remember when I was a dean in the economics faculty, I had the colleagues from statistics coming with a piece of paper. It is written this. Come on, that's just the starting point. Then we start with interpretation. And we come to a totally different result. So the courts are very important. Litigation is very important. EU law has evolved Court of Justice a lot because of litigation, because of cases brought to the Court of Justice. And this is what makes EU law special. Yes, there is national law, but if national law is in conflict with EU law, there can be litigation, and EU law takes precedence. And this, you know, through litigation. How many procurement cases we have in Europe these days every year? It's about 40. How many GPA cases on procurement there have been since 1981? Was it 1981? 1981? 3 cases. And one was about inadmissibility. So they didn't even get to the merit. So EU law is really hard law. What we lawyers get excited about. UNCITRAL is soft, very soft. WTO is a bit stronger until the United States decided not to name the next judge to the WTO panel, so everything stops. EU law, you go to courts. And the commission go to court against delinquent member states. So you must be aware of these dynamics and also guidance coming from the Commission. Going back to what Martin was already highlighting, the whole time was internal market. These days, sustainability is also important. We will have presentations in the afternoon, but this is where we, the lawyer, really need the economists. They must work and tell us what is effective, what is, we make a lot of confusion about the words, efficient. A big challenge in this network is making stuff objective, measurable. Because we can easily say, oh, this is so complicated. Well, I would say, do you think building a hospital is simple? Do you think that adding solar panel is going to make it more complicated? Much more complicated? Of course, if you do the Berlin airport and to help SMEs, you decide to have 800 lots, then you have the Berlin airport disaster. Sorry, but being Italian, German disasters make me feel, I'm not saying normal, but close to normality. So this is maybe complicated, maybe not, it depends. We need the non-lawyers. It is very fun, very nice for us, the lawyers, to debate about this. We are actually totally ignorant, or maybe errs say things about what is efficient, what is not, what is doable, what is objective, what can be measured. So this is not lawyers' pride all the time. This is really interdisciplinarity. So just one question and I'm done because we are 5 minutes late. Which pattern the Dutch, the English, the German, the French was followed by EU law? You should have already the answer. So please, which pattern? Dutch, English, German, French was followed by EU legislation? Okay, I was not clear, sorry. It was clearly the French one. This is about law. This is about litigation. And litigation is not something bad. You know, the English, they have their approach to litigation. When the English started being serious about judicial review, not public procurement, judicial review, in the 80s, the government published a booklet, The Judge Over Your Shoulder, as something new, as scary. In Italy, we say one procurement, two litigations, but not because it is complicated, sustainable, or whatever, because we have a culture of litigation. So thank you for listening. Really, interdisciplinarity is the most important thing in this network. We, the old, well, more seniors, we are not all old, yes, okay, anyway, there are the colleagues, we will be trying our best to interdisciplinarity, but interdisciplinarity is a mission for each one of you. So thank you very much for listening. If there is a very, very short question while we do the text, please. So no question. It's my incredible pleasure being 10 minutes late to invite a colleague